Morning. It's nice to meet you as well. How are you? Good. I hope the lighting's okay. The sun is just coming up here in Colorado. Great. Well, I was diagnosed at a very young age. I was about 6 or 7 years old. And actually, originally, I was diagnosed as ambidextrous. So the thought process then was that a person who is ambidextrous, excuse me, didn't have a dominant eye. And if you didn't have a dominant eye, you couldn't track words across a page. So they held me back from learning to read. And in that process, they gave me the WIS test, and then it was determined that I was dyslexic. I don't remember exactly, but this is what my parents told me as an adult. So now we know that that belief is really not correct about being able to track words across a page, but they held me back from beginning to learn to read until the end of 2nd grade here in the States. So that put me drastically behind my peers. It is, and unfortunately, that was the belief system in that time frame. And they really wrote me off. They sat my parents down in a parent-teacher conference, and I write about this in my book, and they told my parents that I might finish high school, college was out of the question, and they should focus on finding a husband to take care of me because I was not going to contribute to society. Yeah, talk about being written off. Excuse me. It is. It is. And it's unfortunate, but it was the bias at the time. Clearly, they got it wrong. So many people and even experts still associate dyslexia with an intellectual disability. And that's simply not the case. We just learn differently. Yeah, that's a great question. So it was this big thing about when Ellen was going to learn to read. And it was built up and built up like it was going to be this impossible thing. And I remember so clearly sitting down with my teacher and opening up the book. And I even remember the first word that I read, and it was the color red. And I started reading, and I was kind of like, what's the big deal? This isn't so difficult. Unfortunately, I got the message very clearly that no one believed in me other than my parents, that I was broken, that I had brain damage, and I was a second-class citizen. And that is traumatic and destroys self-esteem and self-worth. And I have fought back from that for years. And it wasn't until I published my book that I really got it, just how wrong they were. And if I could hold it up, here it is. They completely disempowered me. And I had to learn how to empower myself and how to heal. Unfortunately, I had other traumas in addition to that, but I started working with a licensed credentialed therapist about 6 years ago, and specifically doing EMDR work, which is for trauma. And I'm still doing the work. One of the things I've learned from doing the work is that healing at some point and working with a therapist starts to transmute from just a healing process to a self-discovery process. And that's when things get really interesting, because you start to really explore who you are from the inside out, rather than things that were imposed on you or happened to you. You know, it affects every aspect of your life. It affects your relationships. It affects your employment. For me, it translated into always trying to be a people pleaser, trying to be super nice to get people to be nice back to me. And unfortunately, or the biggest issue for me, was it made me very vulnerable to predators and narcissistic personalities and bullies. I ended up in a very bad marriage, married to a narcissist. He was psychologically abusive, and we had an incident of violence. But I understand now that because of my low self-esteem and low self-worth, he was looking for somebody like me. And there's a lot of predators. We see them in the workplace, a lot of bullies, and they are just hunting for the low self-esteem people because they can take advantage. As I wrote in my book, I was literally prey to these people, and I had no idea. Yeah, it's pretty shocking, but that's what happens. You know, it's interesting. I had been in a very healthy relationship in college, so I knew how it felt to look into a man's eyes and know that I was loved. And I went looking for that in my marriage. And I had this very clear moment of realization that I looked at the man who I was married to, and I looked in his eyes, and all I saw was cold black eyes staring back at me. And then I realized at that moment that it shook me to my core. And I realized it wasn't a real marriage. There was no love there. It was control, it was manipulation, it was gaslighting. I firmly believe he was incapable of love, that it was all just an act. And I knew at that point I needed to get out. I reached out to my parents for help, and I started planning. I planned by secretly shipping things to my parents' house, pulling aside important paperwork, things like tax documents. And I planned and I waited. I waited for him to leave and go to work. I'm going to back up here a little bit. I left very early one morning, taking the car into the dealership for some work. And I knew he was going to be leaving shortly after that to go to work. I waited for him to leave. I left some time there. And then I snuck back, frantically loaded up the car with the few things that I would take. I left almost everything. I took some clothing, I took photographs, I took a few things, and I grabbed my two dogs, and I got in the car and sped away. I was terrified that he was going to come back and catch me mid-escape. I got out safely, and then as I got a few miles away, I pulled over, and I didn't explain to my parents or my sister how severe it was, but I let them know that I was out. My father was a very strong man, and I was concerned that if he knew the truth, that he would retaliate, perhaps violently, against my ex-husband or ex-husband-to-be. And I just didn't want to see that happen. So I just wanted to get out and start over. And I did. A lot of people don't understand, at least here in the States, every day, 3 women are killed and 1 man is killed in a intimate partner relationship every day in this country. And 70% of the fatalities that happen when the person tries to leave. I'll back up a little bit, but prior to that, to my leaving and my escape, the reason I planned the escape was I went to see an attorney before leaving. My mother insisted I go see an attorney, and she was right. And that attorney sat me down and woke me up. She scared the hell out of me. I didn't understand how much danger I was in. And she was very clear with me that I do not announce my leaving. I leave secretly, quietly, and discreetly. And that's why I planned and executed my escape, because I was frightened. I was really frightened that I was in trouble. And I didn't understand how much trouble I was in. So thank God for that attorney waking me up, because otherwise I might have tried to leave and telling him and she was insistent that I not do that. She said, take your things and leave quietly. But I got out. I consider myself very lucky. Well, at that point, I was actually living in Florida and my parents were in New Hampshire. So the day that I got out, I spent the next 3 days driving back to New England. And every mile that I put between he and I felt better and better and better. It was really just a sense of relief, and I had a safe place to go. My parents took me in, and I'm grateful for that. But what I didn't understand yet, and it hit me probably a few days or a few weeks later, I was completely traumatized. I was so traumatized, I was driving through red lights and stop signs. I knew I was in trouble, and I knew I had to break this pattern, and I didn't understand why I had been abused. I didn't understand that my low self-esteem made me a target. I hit my surrender point, and I remember a moment where I just looked up at the sky and I just said, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm all yours. And then I had this sense of peace and being taken care of, and that's when I got to work with therapists and coaches. That's when I started my trauma work. You've got to get out. That's the first thing. There are organizations, there are professional, trained people. Here in the States, there's hotlines, state hotlines, national hotlines of people who can help you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Yeah, it's probably going to be hard at first, but it might just save your life. The healing process takes time. It takes time, but it gets better every day. And unresolved trauma will ruin your life. You've got to work on the trauma. It will fester. It will create patterns. It'll repeat. And it's not just about healing. This is something I think that a lot of people get stuck in. It's also about learning to thrive again. And I've learned how to do that as well. One of the things I've done quite a bit of is self-defense training. And in doing the self-defense training with some pretty credentialed people, I'm talking a retired FBI agent and retired Navy SEALs. And there's a self-confidence that comes with doing martial arts training and different kinds of self-defense training with these people. And I won't be prey again. I'm now the woman that you don't mess with, because I will defend myself and I will not apologize for defending myself. We have a responsibility to defend ourselves. We have a responsibility to ourselves. And I didn't understand that. I didn't believe I was worthy of being defended. And I had a wake-up call in the middle of a training, and it was world-changing for me, life-changing for me. That moment was just incredible. And I won't be a victim again. So personally, I want to tell my story because this is part of the hero's journey. If you're familiar with the hero's journey, the last part of that is to bring what you've learned back to your tribe. And I want to help other women and men as well. You know, one of the things I've been learning is that there's a lot of men who are being abused, not just women. And I've had many private conversations that have shocked me. As I've told my story, people pull me aside to have a private conversation with me and share their own personal abuse stories. I think it is much worse than anybody realizes because I'm having these conversations. So my personal goal is to help people, and professionally over the long term, you know, I'm taking a coaching certification course. This is the second coaching course I've taken. I want to be a coach to people, and I want to reach out and speak to groups of, you know, it can be any group. It can be educators, it can be women's groups. And I want to share what I've learned because I think it can really help people to understand what's happening to them. Because in the moment, it's very difficult to realize what's really happening. And I think that by sharing my story, that maybe I can help people to realize what's happening. And they can take steps to move forward and get out or address their trauma and learn to thrive again. Sure. That was great. My dad and I were very close. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019. He was 80, so he lived a full life. My father understood that the real important learning happens outside the classroom. And both of my parents never accepted the condemnation that the education system imposed on me. And they fought against it and they stood up for me. So my dad taught me everything he knew. As a little girl, I remember my elbows propped up on the table with nautical charts rolled out, and he taught me how to read the nautical charts. I loved being with him and just being around him. Going fishing and being in the boat with him was just joy for me. He used to say, everything I do for you girls has a reason, and I will teach you everything I know because I want you to be prepared for whatever life throws at you. So he was very mindful of teaching us life skills. And then at age 15, he sent me on Outward Bound, which I loved. And that was a life-changing experience for me because I got to get out there as a 15-year-old and suddenly I wasn't the dyslexic student anymore. I was just a regular teenager. And then at 17, he signed me up to get certified to scuba dive, which I was thrilled to do. So it was always this theme of challenges, learning new things. And putting yourself in a challenging situation, you learn and you grow and you learn to persevere. And he was very specifically giving me hard things to do. I had chores to do that were hard. I stacked a lot of firewood. And as a little girl, I would often complain and I'd put my hands on my hips and say, Daddy, this is really hard. And he'd look at me and he'd say, it's good for you. Put hair on your chest. And I'd say, but Daddy, I'm a girl. And he'd say, go do it anyway. It's good for you. I just loved doing those kinds of things with him. And I learned a lot. Yeah. I learned how to persevere through hard things. And I did it through physical challenges, through outward bound, skiing, scuba diving. So I was building self-confidence. I was building self-esteem. That was the place where I was safe. I felt more comfortable rappelling a 100-foot cliff, dangling with a harness and ropes from the top of a cliff than I felt in a classroom. A classroom, because of the way I was treated by the teachers and the bullies, was a dangerous, hostile environment. It was ravaging my self-esteem on a daily basis. I had to fight through every test, every lesson, every day was a fight. I felt it easier standing on top of a mountain, looking over the top of a ski trail, a double black diamond. That was easy. And I was able to carry some of that self-esteem and some of that fight into the classroom, and I never gave up on myself because I knew I could do these other things. And if I just worked hard enough and practiced enough, I could get through it. But it took total commitment and a bit of defiance. There was something so deep inside of me that just knew that they were wrong about me. I just knew in my heart and my soul that this was wrong. And I refused to quit all the way to a master's degree and publishing a book. So I beat them. I beat them by their own standards. I did everything they said I couldn't do. And that feels pretty good. You know, I just want to help. I want people to know you can overcome unbelievable challenges. You can. You know, I consider myself the lucky one because I had amazing parents who supported me. They taught me not to give up, and they supported me. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily have that. And I hope that my story can at least be a beacon for them to know that you can do it. You can survive and you can learn to thrive again. So that's my inspiration. And I feel, because I'm so lucky, I feel a very strong sense of responsibility to share what I've learned, because people need to know this, especially if you're a parent of a dyslexic child or you're a dyslexic yourself. You're not broken. You're not brain damaged. In fact, the research that's coming out now says the exact opposite. NASA, the rocket scientists, specifically recruit people who are dyslexic. British intelligence services, I've heard, specifically recruits people who are dyslexic because we have gifts in seeing patterns and seeing things that most people miss. And I will say the majority of the research comes out of the UK. You guys seem to be the most advanced in understanding dyslexia and the dyslexic mind. It's that sense of responsibility. You can reinvent yourself. In fact, life will sometimes push you to that, even when you don't want to do it. And you can have wonderful adventures along the way. You know, I've had some really exciting opportunities, scuba diving, skiing. I worked with a pioneer in the diving industry. I have trained with Navy SEALs, an FBI agent. And those are extraordinary experiences. And they have shaped me, and I have loved them. You've got to do the work if you want a different life. The real challenge is not the work. The challenge is understanding what's happening to you in the given moment. I didn't understand for a long time that I was being gaslighted, manipulated, and controlled. I was focused on my marriage. Got to make it work. And if I just do something different, I got to make it work. I wasn't listening to that inner voice that was telling me that something was really wrong. And it wasn't me. It had nothing to do with me. And I think to the dyslexic student or the parent of a dyslexic child, you're going to need to fight for your child. And as a dyslexic student, you're going to need to fight for yourself. And you're going to have to work hard. You're going to have to work harder than anybody else. And it's not fair. It's just not. There will be rewards, and you will discover your strengths. You will find as a dyslexic student that as you grow and learn that you have talents that normies don't have. That's what we call non-dyslexics. It will take time, but as you grow and learn, you will find your talents. And as I have come to see, and I hope you will come to see, that there are great gifts with the dyslexic mind. There are abilities that other people don't have, which is why NASA and British intelligence is recruiting you. And I think as time goes on and as the research continues, we will see more and more of this. I look forward to the day when we put on our resume, certified dyslexic thinker. And already Sir Richard Branson is very famous, and he is dyslexic. And he's even encouraged LinkedIn. I believe that this is up. I don't know for sure, but there's a category on LinkedIn that you can put up and you can check off it. It says dyslexic thinker. And that's a large part from his influence. Work hard. You will get the reward for working hard. Yes, I would say if you're called to a challenge, go for it. Make sure it's appropriate. Make sure it's safe. One of the things my father used to say, he knew I was a very adventurous person. And he'd say to me, Ellen, you can do whatever you want, but get properly trained. So the example of scuba diving, don't just go jump in the water with a bunch of scuba gear. Get properly trained. So take on challenges that are appropriate for you, that are safe, where you mitigate risk, and get properly trained, because you will learn and grow from those challenges. You know, looking back on some of the things I've done and the challenges I've overcome, I'm grateful for them, because they've made me very, very strong. And that's a gift. Likewise, and thank you so much for the opportunity to tell my story.